We will be live soon. Hello, everyone. If you're out there, if you are out there, please put something in the chat so I'll know I'm not just talking to myself today. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Deidre. Is there anybody else in this session? I think I'll just wait a few minutes. Hey, Kevin. Thank you for texting me. I've got organizers and speakers and admins as attendees, so I'm going to give it a few more minutes. Well, since we're recording, I'll start my presentation and it'll at least be in the recording. Hello, everybody. I'm Crystal Darby. I'm a senior business advisor at the UTSA Small Business Development Center, and I'm really happy to be here. This is one of my favorite topics. It's Lean Canvas. It's a really quick way to test your business ideas, and it's a very quick way to get a business plan together, or at least the components of the business plan. And it's enough for a business plan if you don't need any funding. So we'll get started. So I've got a question to please answer in the chat. For those of you who are watching this on video, you probably won't be able to answer this in the chat, but you may want to think about this. Have you used a visual plan or a business plan outline? And a lot of my clients have written business plans. A lot of them have been through that business model canvas, and we'll talk about that, and the Lean Canvas and the difference between the two. So the business model canvas is something that was developed some time ago, and there's lots of information on it online. We do workshops on business model canvas. Some of the other centers I know do as well. And the whole idea behind this business model canvas is that it's solution delivery centric. It is about the product itself. It is about the service itself. It is the thing that you're delivering to your client. The Lean Canvas is customer problem centric, and I'll explain more about why that's different and how important that is. Neither one of them is the ultimate solution. Neither one of them is better than the other. They can be used for different purposes. You may want to do both of them. They're very, very similar though. So a lot of the terminology in the business model canvas will be in the Lean Canvas as well. So this is what it looks like overall. And we're going to go through each of these sections at a time so that you can understand what you're supposed to put into each section. And in the handouts, we've got the slides. You'll have access to the slides, but we also have put a blank one so that you can, with just the headings, so that you can collect your information and write in that if you download it and print it out. So what we found is the Lean Canvas was developed by a guy named Ash Mara, who took the business model canvas, liked it a lot, and had used it. But he found that he had a really hard time getting to failure quickly. He wanted to understand on all the different business ideas that he had. He wanted to start off with one of them and get to a decision on whether he wanted to move forward with it or not. And he developed this lean canvas for a number of reasons. Number one, traditional business plans take a very, very long time to put together. If you've ever put one together, you know that it takes a while to do the research. It takes a while to write them out. It takes a long time to get them polished and looking good and in shape where a lender would accept it. One of the other problems is that most businesses, after they've written them, they don't look at them again. They stick them in a drawer and they just go on from there. And they don't revisit them, which they should, because business plan should be a living document. And hardly anyone ever reads them. I have heard it said that if you put in the middle of your business plan, "I will buy you a beer," if you mention that you saw this sentence, nobody ever has to buy a beer. The same thing was said about my master's thesis. So, but they do read the executive summary and they look at the financials. But the problem is that every lender has to have that business plan in their file. Especially if they're planning on getting an SBA guarantee, that business plan has to be there and they have to be able to refer to it. The other thing is that if they look at the financials and then they see something that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to them, they will go back to the business plan for that particular section to determine whether it makes sense, if there's an explanation for why some of the numbers seem a little out of line, either too low or too high. With the lean canvas, as opposed to the business model canvas, and as opposed to a full-fledged business plan, you are way less likely to build a product or a service that no one wants because you're focused on the problem rather than the solution. And this quote kind of sums it up. If you decided to build a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. Everything. So if you focus on the solution, you've already got this great idea, but do you know what problem you're solving for your customer? So you can reduce the risk on the business by focusing on that problem. And then 4 main reasons for the lean canvas as opposed to a traditional business plan. It takes you less than a day, or it should. You can get your idea across really quickly. And it's a very concise way to see the business in all aspects of the business. This is true for the business model canvas as well. It's portable. It's a single page. You can make it into a PDF and then just send it to people for their feedback, or to anybody who's going to have some input on the business. And it's effective. It really communicates what you're doing, especially if you keep up with it and change things as you move along. So first sections we're going to talk about, and these are usually done in conjunction with each other, right? Problem statement and then the customer segments. And let's talk about each of those. So when you start to do this, for each of the customer segments, you're going to list the top 1 to 3 problems that you think you're solving for that customer. And you kind of bounce back and forth between the two. You may have a really good idea of the problem, and then you try to figure out exactly who is the customer going to be for that problem. And while you're thinking about the customer, you think about another customer that may have a slightly different problem or another problem that you might be able to solve. And then you start listing the alternatives to that problem. Sometimes the alternative is nothing. Sometimes people don't do anything about the problem that they have. And then determine other users who aren't customers. We see this very often when it's a product or a service that's aimed at children. The children are not the customers. Usually, I mean, sometimes they have their own money and are able to spend it independently, but for the most part, your customers are going to be the parents in that case. So think about those two different levels of the people who might purchase and might use your product or service. And then figure out who are your early adopters. These are the people that you don't really have to explain. In the tech community, these are the people that stand out in line for hours to get the new iPhone. These are people who are already sold on the idea. You don't have to explain it to them. You don't have to point out that they've got a problem. Now, granted, I think Steve Jobs came up with a problem I didn't know I had, right? So sometimes it's a little bit different, but not often can somebody come up with an idea of a product or service that nobody realized that they needed. Yes, Deidre, a life force device. So for each problem, ask yourself, and ask this over and over again, so what? Often we don't get to the core of what the problem is, right? And if you focus on the problem, you are much more likely to not only get to a better solution, but also it really helps with marketing copy. I've got an HVAC contractor who's been my client for a long time, and he loves energy efficient equipment. But that's not the problem. The problem is the cost of energy, right? It's the electric bill, the utility bill. So when you talk about the problem in a case like that, you're really talking about saving money. And usually that problem is going to come down to saving money or saving time or saving pain. One of those three things. So for the chat, share who is your primary customer segment and who are your customers. So the next section that we want to talk about is your unique value proposition. You notice we haven't talked about the solution yet. We're not going to get to the solution until a little bit later, but we really want to talk about what makes you different. This is explaining the end result that only you can deliver. And you focus again on the benefits. You pull that unique value proposition from the problem that you're solving. I read this formula, and although most of the UVPs that I'm sharing do not go into this much specificity, but you want to think about the end result the customer wants and add to it a specific period of time, and then add some more that addresses the objections and keep that all in 140 words. Very difficult to do. In most cases, you're not going to see a UVP that addresses the objections, at least not directly. These are some of the examples that I've found. Evernote, if you're familiar with it, a platform where you can keep notes about everything, and their UVP is remember everything. And UVPs can very often be taglines as well. Square, start selling today, right? This is their unique value proposition. It's what they think they're doing that nobody else is doing, at least not as quickly, not as well. Target, expect more, pay less. Trying to make the comment that Target has better quality, but the price is still low, which is very hard to do. If you can't own your own category, which is the ideal, then try to create a new category. A friend of mine once explained to me that our former president created a new category. He couldn't own the category of politician, but he could own the category of reality star politician or TV star politician or a different kind of politician. So create a new category if you can't own it. And then study the UVPs of brands that you admire. Go look at the companies that you have respect for, that you feel, and not necessarily the ones that are doing what you're doing, but other ones that are brands that you think highly of, and see what they use as their taglines, what they use as their unique value proposition. One of the best ways you can create, one of the best things you can do is to create a high concept pitch. This is something that kind of started in Hollywood, and a lot of tech firms are using it, but I think it really relates to just about any company if you can try to put it in terms that most people would get right away. YouTube actually used the phrase Flickr for videos, and that is not their tagline. Their tagline is broadcast yourself. But they use the high concept pitch of Flickr for videos because people were familiar with Flickr. And Flickr had photographs, but YouTube was going to take that to a different level and do videos. But trading on the familiarity of Flickr, they could do that, and people immediately knew what they were talking about. Alien, the movie Alien, originally pitched as Jaws from space. Absolutely. Backdraft, if you're familiar with that movie, it was Top Gun in a firehouse. So it's something that puts across that meaning very, very quickly, that is comparing it to something that's familiar, but explaining the additional feature. So now we're going to get to solution. You thought we'd never get here, didn't you? But this is the time we'll talk about this solution. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is don't worry about coming up with a really good one. Don't worry about coming up with something that's well-defined or detailed, but try to explain the solution to each of your top problems that you outlined at the beginning. Explain what it is that you're going to do. And in this case, you can concentrate on the features and the capabilities rather than the benefits. You really want to be able to talk about what this does, how it does it. And as you go through this and as you get to customer validation, which we'll talk about in a minute, you may find that your solution will change. And this is a really good time for customer validation. I work with an awful lot of startups, and one of the things that nearly all of them don't do ahead of time is go out and really talk to real people. They're pretty sure that they've got a product or service that people want. They've talked to a few friends and family, but it really helps if you talk to people who don't know you well, who aren't trying to encourage you, or in the case of some friends and family, trying to discourage you. Go out and talk to complete strangers if you can. And I'm a member of Geekdom, one of our co-working spaces here in San Antonio, and we do a project called Startup Weekend. And there are teams, groups break into teams with a particular product or service in mind, and then they go out on the streets of downtown San Antonio and corner complete strangers, or they make phone calls to people who are in that target market. And you talk to them and you talk about your top 3 problems, the things that you really think might be a problem that you can solve. Then you go ahead and do it. You ask that potential customer to prioritize those problems and identify anything else that they think is even more important to them. And then ask them, well, what do you do now to solve that problem? You'll get some very interesting answers, including, I don't have a solution. That's a really good thing to hear because you've got a solution. And then describe how you might solve the problem without giving away any trade secrets or anything. And then ask your customer, do you think that would solve your problem? If they say yes, move on and say, if you think it would solve your problem, would you use it if it were free? If I didn't charge you anything for this, would you use it? And then if they say yes, then ask them if they would pay a certain amount per year. And hopefully you've done some research to determine what you think you can charge for this. If they say yes to that, then you're on your way. You may find that some of them would say, oh, I'd pay way more than that. Or, no, it's not quite worth that much, but I would pay this amount. It gives you some feedback. You're not married to these answers. the more people you ask, the more likely you are to get some good information that you can use as you build this out. And then ask for referrals to other potential customers. If they know people that might have the same problems that they do, if they've identified that one of your problems is one of their problems, ask them to get you in touch with other people that might. So, have you done customer validation? You can do it through written or email surveys. You can do phone calls, or you can actually go out and talk to people. Going out and talking to people is a little bit more scary. Oh, then we talk about channels. Oh, I will tell you, this is always a hard one because we've got so many ways to get the word out, right? And so many of them don't work. So we'll think through this. So how are you going to get your message to your customers? One of the most important things you can do is really fine tune who that customer is and figure out as much as you can about what that customer has in common with other people who would be customers, right? If you know the gender, if you know the area of town that they live in, if you know what their interests are, if you know where they get their news, if you know their age, you've narrowed it down a bit, and it makes marketing a whole lot easier. You know that if it's Facebook that you're going to use, you're probably not trying to reach a younger generation. Facebook is for us folks, the folks who have grandchildren. That's why our children are no longer on it, because we're on it. So think about those channels that might work for your particular product to reach your particular audience. Are you going to do free stuff, or are you going to consider paying for advertising? Sometimes you can get the message out with just free, in other words, social media, that kind of stuff. And remember, free is in quotations here because you're still going to have to spend the money. And the kids, we've got a question from the chat room. The kids are apparently on TikTok. That's what my grandson tells me. So definitely see if you can use that. Are you going to do inbound advertising or outbound? In other words, are you going to have them come to you somehow, or are you going to actually do advertising to them, reaching out to them? Are you going to do it direct, you to the customer, or are you going to do some kind of automated system where you can collect information from your customers, send out automated messages? And are you doing it directly, or are you doing it indirectly through other people or other agencies or other organizations that can get that word out? Please, please, please concentrate on retention before referral. Don't try to get your people, your customers, once you get them signed up, don't try to get them to make referrals until you are absolutely sure that they're happy with the product. So concentrate on making them happy and keeping them happy. I see way too many companies who offer really, really good deals to new customers. I've been a loyal customer for a very long time. I'm not getting the good deals. It's a good way to lose a customer because there are always good deals out there. Oh, why am I thinking of my Wi-Fi service right now? And then build the ideal early channel, right? What kind of content marketing can you come up with? What can you say about your product? And this goes back to the problem statement because you're really focusing on the issue that your customer has and the benefits that your product is going to provide to them and your universal sales pitch. And then don't forget to enlist user and employee generated content. This is one of the ways that people have, or that companies have really found to increase their visibility, to increase their engagement. Remember that your employees can represent your brand and get the word out if they're encouraged to do so and if you trust them to do so. But you want your customers, your users, as well as your customers, and there's both categories, you want them to talk about your product, to talk about your service, to really get you involved in and get them involved in sharing the message about you. You know, it's a restaurant that's on Yelp. It's a restaurant or a retail store that's got a Facebook business page or a Google listing, or, you know, anything along those lines that you can encourage people to talk about your business. There's a restaurant in San Antonio that I happened to go to for lunch way before the pandemic. And they would, if you checked in on Facebook and posted that you were at their restaurant so that all your friends could see that's where you were, they would give you a free bowl of queso. It's a cheap thing to do for a customer. I mean, it's not going to cost you very much to just ladle out a small bowl of queso, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to check in for that queso. I happen to like queso. Exactly. Who doesn't love queso? When you think about the channels that you're going to use, are you going to use social media? And if so, which platform? It's very hard to use all of them, and not all of them are appropriate for different audiences. You know, Twitter's very hard to make anything of unless you've got a national presence or a product that can be sold nationally. Instagram, kind of the same thing. It's very difficult to be seen on Instagram. But you definitely can, you know, use Facebook, understand that things that you post are not going to be seen unless you're actually paying for advertising. Word of mouth is always the best way and the cheapest way to get business. But sometimes that's hard, and you've got to encourage people. As I said earlier, you've got to encourage people who are your customers to share their good experiences. Are you going to do pay per click? Are you going to find a way to, when people click on the ad on Facebook, they convert? Are you going to make sure that your landing pages convert customers to actual customers rather than just people who are looking? You know, and then there's always traditional advertising. Believe it or not, you know, people are still using radio, still using TV advertising, newspapers, magazines, and then of course there's the online version of all of those that may be appropriate depending on the industry you're in and the people that you're trying to reach. I'm a big fan of postcards for certain types of businesses because it's really hard to not see the ad on the postcard before you throw it into the recycling bin. You can't help but see it. Now, if it catches your attention and it's something you're sort of interested in, you may put it on your desk and keep it there for a while. But postcards can be a very effective way. Your biggest expense on that is going to be postage. And then what else? I mean, you can think of a number of other ways that you can get through to the people that want to buy your product or service. And then these two kind of go hand in hand, cost structure and revenue streams, but we'll tackle them separately. So I tell my clients that when they're first starting to figure out all of their costs, they're going to feel like they are pulling numbers out of thin air, right? It's primarily you're just guessing. And as you get more and more information, more accurate information, then you can start to replace those guesstimates with actual numbers. List everything that you can think of that you're going to have to spend to be able to get this started or to move to the next level. List everything. And then specify, is this a startup cost before I even open the doors? Or is this an ongoing monthly cost? And make sure that you've figured out the difference between those two. And then be sure that you think about supplies and labor. Very often clients will forget that they need supplies, and that they're going to need supplies, not just initially, but they're going to need to replenish those supplies as they go along through the business. And labor costs are huge for just about every industry. If it's not a solo entrepreneurship, then you're probably going to have some labor costs or some employees, one of the two, or both. And then include what you're planning on paying yourself. If you're going for a loan, which you'll end up having to do a full-fledged business plan, but if you're planning to do that, the lenders want to know that you're going to be able to handle your household expenses and make a little money so that you'll be in it for the long haul. But they don't really like to see overblown salaries, but figure out what you can afford to pay yourself and what you need to be able to live on. And then revisit the cost. One of the things I love about this lean canvas is you do it and then you do another one 6 months down the road, and then you do another one, or maybe every 3 months you revisit it and then change things around, because then you realize a little bit more about what it costs to operate the business. So on revenue streams, you've got to figure out how you're going to earn revenue. You probably won't be profitable from the day you start the business, but you should have some revenue somewhere along the way. Even Facebook decided they needed some revenue. And then identify the customer, as I said, not the user, because remember that the revenue stream is coming from the actual people who pay the money, right? And then figure out where the evidence is of something that can reduce money or time for the customer, right? Where is the pain point? And how can you tap into that and figure out how much you're going to make based on that? You have to kind of define your pricing model. How are you going to determine? And I hear this a lot from clients on, well, what do I charge? How do I figure out what I charge? And a lot of that comes down to research, figuring out what all of your costs are and then adding a percentage. That's a cost approach, making sure that you're going to make enough that will cover all the costs, not just the cost of the goods that you may be reselling, or what it costs to put together a product, but also all of the other costs. You need to make sure that once all those numbers are calculated, there will be some profit at the end of it. In fact, a lot of folks now are including profit as a line item in their expenses so that they're sure that they cover that and that it's an important expense, is to make sure that you're making profit. The other way to approach those costs is to start looking into all the other solutions, your competition perhaps, and find out how much they charge. And then figure out, how can I provide more value that will make my higher cost worthwhile? Or am I just going to compete along cost? The problem with competing at cost and competing based on price is that somebody can lower their price. I'm very old, and I remember a time when we had gas wars, gasoline wars, and gas stations across the street from each other would get into gas wars. I'm not even going to tell you how low those prices are, because it makes me feel like I'm lying. But they were under $1 per gallon. Let's just leave it at that. And then for consultants and sole proprietorships, I kind of hit on this as a way to figure out how much you need to make. You decide how much you want to make annually, and then you divide that by 1,000. And that's how much you should be making per hour. Now, big caveat. If you can possibly avoid it, do not charge by the hour. You will always end up shorting either you or the customer. When you first start out, it takes you longer to do things, so the customer gets charged more. You get better at it, and then the customer gets charged less because now you're better. Doesn't make any sense. But if you start with the hourly rate that you need to make to get to the goal you want, then you can estimate your time for particular projects and give a per project cost. Now, I've had clients who have told me, oh, I couldn't possibly charge that much. I had one that in her last full-time job, she was making $80,000 a year. When we added benefits, we were looking at $120,000 for the total package. And I said, you've got to make $120 per hour if you want to make as much as you were on the job you had, on the full-time job. And she was, oh, 120 an hour. That just sounds impossible. She's charging way more than that now, and I'm very proud of her. But, it's not going to make it. You're not going to make it to that goal if you're not charging enough. And I told her there's some things I don't want to buy on the cheap. Your product is one of them, your service, and sushi's the other. Cheap sushi just does not impress me. I also asked her if she wanted to be Walmart, because Walmart does indeed, they compete on price because they can do that because of their volume. They don't compete on quality. It's not the place you're going to go buy the interview suit. You're going to make sure you buy stuff that you want to last at another store that has better quality, but will probably cost you a little bit more. But you definitely don't want to compete on price. I would hope you really want to compete on quality and value. And then the key metrics. This is sometimes a really hard one to figure out how you want to measure how you're doing. So my advice is initially you just pick one or two from this list. And this comes from Pirate Metrics by Dave McClure. Acquisition, in other words, the number of new customers. Activation, how many of those customers are actually signing up. The acquisitions before the customer, right? Getting them into the pipeline. Activation, they're actually signing up. Retention, those that stay with you from month to month, or they come back to you to buy again, or they come visit your restaurant again. And then referrals, how many times one of your customers will refer somebody else to you. And then, of course, the ultimate one, revenue. But you don't initially have to start off with your metrics measuring revenue because it's hard to make those goals. And of course, you change the goals as you achieve them, right? So maybe acquisition's the first one you tackle, just trying to get people into the pipeline, make sure that they know about you, make sure that they've hit your website, getting a certain number of followers on Facebook or on LinkedIn, finding a certain number of connections on LinkedIn, figuring out what those numbers are that are important to you, and then writing them down, actually writing down what your goal is for those metrics so that you'll know when you've done it. And then so important, celebrate when you do it, right? When you meet that goal, then celebrate and then move on to the next one. But don't forget the celebration part. That's very important for the long haul. Okay, the last section, it's the unfair advantage. This one is probably one of the hardest ones to come up with, largely because sometimes you don't have an unfair advantage. But an unfair advantage is really something that nobody else can copy. Now, the UVP, people figure out what you're doing, they can copy it all day. But an unfair advantage is something that you've got that nobody else has. And here are some of those examples, right? So it may be some insider information, or you've got an authority who's part of your organization who knows more than anybody, or it could be an expert endorsement, right? Any of these things can do that for you and can be an unfair advantage. And a lot of times you don't have one or you can't think of one. You may develop it as you develop the business. Maybe your recipes are already recognized as some of the best in the city. Maybe it's something that you've done in your past that brings you to this business with more information than anybody could possibly have. That's kind of that insider information. So really give this some thought about how you can figure out what will work for this. And like I said, you may have to leave it blank for a while. So that's it. That's the lean canvas in a nutshell. And I highly recommend that you kind of play with this, think about this for your business and how it'll work for yours. especially if you don't need a full-fledged business plan. Here's some advice. Do it quickly. Set a timer for 20 minutes and then stop at the end of those 20 minutes. If those ideas don't come right away, just leave the sections blank and don't worry about it. Don't try to predict the future. Granted, you've got to make some estimates on what may happen with the business, but don't get hung up in that. And then focus on the customer, focus on the customer's problem, put yourself in the customer's shoes. Remember that if you're not your target market, you may not have those answers. You may have to go out and talk to some people, not just for customer validation, but just to kind of fine tune what that problem is before you even get started on this. It's very difficult, I think. It's that forest and trees problem that we all have, to be able to see your business from the outside in. So try to get a way to get out of the business, get out of your own way, and think about that. You can do more than one lean canvas, right? For more than one idea, or more than one problem, or more than one customer target. And sometimes comparing them side by side will help you figure out which of these ideas is going to work best. I have a number of clients who have a ton of really good business ideas and have a very hard time determining where they're going to start. They want to do all of them right now. And of course, the more you divert your focus and divide your focus into different areas, the harder time you're going to have moving forward on one of those ideas and actually achieving success. Getting singularly focused on what you want to do will help. And so doing those lean canvases side by side, figuring out which one you can start first to get some money coming in. One of the most important things in any business is to get that low-hanging fruit, right? To get that money coming in. Cash flow is king. Cash flow is so important. You have to have that going on to be able to move forward. So if you can find a way to pull that in right away on a business, then you do that one first. After you've made some money, then you can move on to idea number 2, idea number 3. But look at the priorities in order of importance. How much pain is your customer in? And I don't mean necessarily physical pain, but how much of a hassle does your customer have to go through to solve that problem? And sometimes it is pain. Ease of reach. Are you able to get the word out and get the product or the service out to a number of people quickly? Is it easy for them to contact you to get the product or service? And then where is your price? How does your price line up against any other solutions to the problem? And then, is there a market for it? How big is the market? You don't necessarily need the biggest market if you're going to be able to sell a whole lot of people in that smaller market. I'd rather sell a whole bunch of people in a smaller market than to sell a very small number in a much larger market. But you've got to weigh those to figure out which one's going to work best for you. And I've got a ton of resources. As I said, these slides are available and you can just read to your heart's content. Alex Osterwalder is the person who came up with the business model canvas initially. And then Ash Mara, the one at the top of this slide, is the one that came up with the lean canvas. And he's got a number of books out. This leanstack.com/lean canvas is a platform that you can use to design your own lean canvas. He has a premium version, but you don't really need it, but you can get onto the platform online. And there's little videos for each of the sections on this in case you need a little more instruction on it. Or you can just download the form and go from there. A lot of companies will use this form. Let me click real quickly to this. They'll use this blank form and have their employees or their stakeholders pick up some Post-it notes and put their ideas of what the problem is, their ideas of who the customers are, et cetera, through the whole thing, to try and come up with some solutions and come up with a plan. Here's some more resources. Big fan of Seth Godin, of course. Mentioned Dave McClure earlier. All of these have got a ton of information, and a lot of this presentation was pulled from some of these resources. And as I said, this is it. This is the business model canvas, the blank one. So, questions? I don't see any questions in the chat. So,
hi, Crystal. We do have a request. You showed a chat/discussion question after your slide. Good time for customer validation. Can you show that again? It was about halfway.
Certainly can. That one. That one?
I think that's it. Kevin, do you have any questions about that? I actually have a question, maybe, well, if Kevin, if you're formulating a question, I was thinking about this. Is it always, I think we probably could find statistics that say that one kind is better for different situations, but what would you use to make that assessment of where to spend your energy?
Oh gosh, it depends so much on the industry and so much on what you're trying to put together. I mean, it really does. I think so. For instance, I saw a pitch this weekend that was really aimed at medical professionals, right? So obviously you can't just walk out in the streets of downtown San Antonio and start asking questions and get any validity to that. But figuring out how you can get in touch with medical professionals, and then possibly an email survey is going to work the best on that. Or phone calls if you've got access to their phone numbers. People are not really excited about responding to surveys and responding to phone calls, of course. So somehow you've got to break through that to let them know that this is something they might be interested in. And that's why, just tackling them on the street sometimes is the best way to do it. If you explain that you're trying to come up with a business plan and you really need some help on what they think their problems are in that particular area. But did that answer your question? Because there's really not an answer.
Sounds like Kevin wanted to capture that, so I think that's good. But there's a lot to think about there. I know that you were just making me think about, really it is about making sure that you don't overassign time and value to it. Maybe I think sometimes we think, oh, well, the surveys, that's going to give us all that we need to know, but people are surveyed out.
Yeah. And this is customer validation. This isn't, the traditional kinds of surveys where you're asking a lot of questions. I mean, it's really just those questions, right? How do they solve that particular problem? What priorities they see, what problems they see. So if you don't have to survey, 1,000 people. We're not trying to get a sample size that's relevant. We're just trying to get some feedback so that we don't make a big mistake and solve a problem that's not a problem. Does that make sense? I hope.
Finding out that, well, wait a minute. No, I don't want to buy your widget because I just use a rubber band.
Right. Exactly. I have a solution and it costs me nothing. It's the worst answer you can get. It's actually the best answer you can get, because then you can move on. And as I said at the beginning, Ash Maurya developed this because he wanted to get to failure more quickly so he could move on and not spend a lot of money. The really good thing about getting this done relatively early in the process is that you haven't invested a lot. You haven't had to come up with your product or your service and outline it and develop your marketing materials and do all of that before you've had a chance to find out, is this something that will get any traction? I think one of the things that worries me about a lot of companies that are starting is that they don't do any of this. They just, I love this product. I know I've got this problem and this is the solution I came up with for my problem. And yet, if you're the only one that has that problem, then it probably isn't a business. So finding out that there's some other people out there. I mean, from a marketing perspective, I see this all the time. You know, people decide on their logos and the colors of their websites based on their favorite colors, rather than really figuring out who their customers are and what their customers would be attracted to and pay attention to. So it can save you a lot of headache and a lot of money and a lot of time if you can just talk to some people that aren't your friends and family. Anything else?
I'm not seeing any further questions. But can you speak again about, you said that you suggest that you kind of maybe initially set a timer and not let yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you really should get through this really quickly. It shouldn't take you very long at all. So set a timer for 20 minutes, 30 if you want to, but stop at the end of that. And as I've said before, skip the parts that you don't have the answer to, then go back to them. But in 20 minutes, get down those first thoughts, those very first thoughts. That can capture so much because you're not suffering through it, trying to overthink it, right? And you'll be surprised at how much information you'll get out of that before you start suffering through it to make it into a full business plan if you need to, or to develop each of those sections a little bit more thoroughly. But definitely just give it a quick pass for each of the sections. Often the solution is really hard to define. And so getting some of the other stuff done before you try to outline the features of the solution will help. So yeah, keep it quick.
So we have another, can you again outline the difference between Lean Canvas and Business Model Canvas?
Yeah. So the Business Model Canvas is really focused on the product or the service, the solution, and its delivery, right? You start with that. You start with those key partners and key activities. You're still going to think about your customer segment, but you're not really focused on the problem that you're solving, right? On a Lean Canvas, the problem is number one, or you do that in conjunction with the customer, but the problem itself is where you're focused most of your energy and most of your attention. And I tell people all the time, if you don't have a problem that you're solving, then you don't have a business. Steve Jobs accepted. But you have to have a problem that you're solving for anybody to be interested in paying money for it. And problems are not bad things. Problems are just, things that you can find a solution for. And a lot of those come from a problem that you're having, something that you've noticed, so that's a great place to start. But before you invest any money, you need to find out if other people are having that same problem. But that's the big difference. Either solution delivery centric, product or service centric, or customer centric.
So I have two
questions.
questions. Oh, sorry about the feedback. One is, so let's say I already have one of those dusty business plans that you talked about because I got a loan a while back and I needed it for that. Should I use this to revisit that business plan, or should I maybe move forward from this in developing my business plan?
I think it really depends on what your reason for doing it is, right? So if you need another loan, if you need additional funds and you're going to a traditional lender, or if you're going to an investor, either way, you're going to have a fully developed business plan, 10, 20, 30 pages worth of business plan. If what you're trying to do is plan your business rather than do a business plan for your business, then I think both the business model canvas and the lean canvas do the trick, and do it in a lot less time than trying to develop another written document that really nobody's going to read. The best part of this is that it can be a group activity. Business plans, for the most part, aren't. Somebody's got to finally write them. And getting feedback on them requires an awful lot of reading on everybody's part. Lean Canvas or the business model canvas, you can all sit down in a conference room and you can discuss what you think the problem is and what the customer segments are and go from there. So it really depends on who the plan is aimed at, who the audience is for that plan.
So kind of going on from that, in addition to using it for your business plan or maybe adjusting your business plan, would you use pieces of this to develop your marketing plan, develop other kinds of plans?
Well, I think especially the problem statement, the solution, and then your unique value proposition, the unfair advantage, right? I mean, all of that goes into your marketing plan. All of those are pieces of that marketing plan, as well as the customer segments and the early adopters. So, and the channels for that matter. Trying to figure out, but what I love about that problem statement is that once you determine what the problem is, you have your benefits pretty well laid out, right? And all marketing copy needs to talk about the benefit to the end user or the customer. What are they going to get out of it? What's in it for them? So any marketing plan that's worth its salt is going to have these components in it. So just like this can be a springboard for a full-blown business plan, it can be a springboard for a full-blown marketing plan, a fully written out marketing plan, or it can just be something that you go back to depending on what you need to do the marketing, right? So a lot of the website text copy can come from the problem, the solution, and the unique value proposition, as well as the unfair advantage, right? You can pull out pieces of that for your marketing copy. But yeah, I mean, it really, again, it depends on the audience. Who do you do that marketing plan for, or who do you plan the marketing with? This is a planning the marketing with kind of thing, or planning the business with. But a business plan has an audience or a potential audience other than internal. Did that help? Did that answer it?
It did. And I was just looking, we had a little bit of cheerleading for solution-based sales.
Yay. Who do I have to thank for that?
Richard Tovar.
Hey, Richard, how you doing? Glad to see you here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to double check and see if we have any more questions. Thanks for everybody who's participated in the chat.
And look at me giving you back your time so you can, if you're here, you can make that 3 o'clock session, even though this one was supposed to go on for considerably longer.
How generous is my friend Crystal? So one more thing, just to also plug for the folks who might watch this at another time. Where do folks go for assistance with Lean Canvas, Business Model Canvas, business plans, and all the good stuff?
I think I thought I had a slide for that.
I bet it's coming
There
up.
we go. How's that? So for those of you who are here live, please check out the business plan overview done by one of my coworkers tomorrow at 2. We've got a how to write a business plan webinar on our online webinar portal, and I'll show you that website in just a minute. Start Smart is at 9 o'clock tomorrow. If you've never owned a business, please take advantage of that workshop. It'll really talk about everything you need to think of before you start your business. And then the SBA's got a whole bunch of resources for creating a plan. This, of course, will be in those slides when you get them. There's a whole bunch of samples and other helpful information at the SBDC net. Really, really great web page that can give you just about everything you could need in the way of industry information and business plan samples. And then if you are in the San Antonio region, this is the phone number to contact us. If you call, Deidre, give me the number to your group.
210
then they can get directed anywhere they need to go.
210-458-2458.
So that's 458-2458. So if you see this in the slide, just subtract 2 from it and you'll have that number. And that the 2458 number can direct you to resources in your particular region.
Absolutely.
And we'd really love it if you would like us on Facebook. Just a little plug for our Facebook page. And I have an online evaluation if you want to take it. So when you get these slides, I'd appreciate the feedback. Here we go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Deidre, thank you so much for helping moderate, ask questions. You did good, girl. Thank you. And what time is your session tomorrow?
Great question.
Sorry, caught you.
It's either 11 or 1, navigating your responsibilities as an employer.
Okay.
Please join me.
Yes, please. Deidre knows more about HR than most of us will. She has forgotten more about HR than most of us will ever learn. So take advantage of her help on that workshop. And I thank you all for those of you who popped in today, and for those of you who are watching this in the future. I'm there, only I'm not there. I'm still here back in the past. So have a good day and enjoy the rest of the conference.